This lecture is about strategic theory. And I'm amazed that so many people come here to listen to that, but I'm very happy for it. So I will not propose any solvings of real problems. We talk about theory, that meaning how to think about strategy. And the basis for my lecture, could it be said, is from the French strategic culture, and in particular it's Nestor, the General Poirier. Strategy is, to begin with, a word which we use very often. You have strategy regarding climate change, gender strategy, and I don't know what. But this is not the way we're talking about strategy here. Here's it is more the basic word of strategy. So strategy is about political goals in conflicts or potential conflicts where the actors are states and their governments. This is the basic proposition I want to talk about. So it's about states, conflicts, actors. Well, then, of course, we could ask, business strategy is something, I suppose many of you are in business. A business strategy is something, the word very often used. And I have nothing against that, of course, I don't care really. But so that the difference between also strategy in business and strategy in the kind I'm talking about is, of course, that in strategy in conflict, it's a zero-sum game, basically. One wins, one loses, or there's a draw. While in business strategy, you don't talk about enemies, you talk or conflicts, you talk about competitors, and basically everybody could win or lose. And that is not so that is the difference. And then I leave business strategy and we'll go back to strategy. And I'm not just talking about military strategy. So the word strategy, which came back to Europe during the late 18th century, was of course from the beginning a concept about military strategy, the art of the general, the science of the general, and then it has been enlarged. And we talk about strategy today. I mean, it's more on the political field. The military strategy is, of course, there, but it's becoming less and less dominant. I have even a friend, an admiral, who now says that we don't now talk about strategy without militaries. I think that's gone a bit too far, but it's a rather large concept. Strategy is science and art. It's science in the same way as political science, so that you can have theories on it. It has a history, you could study it, and so on. And it's an art in the way that strategy is something to practice. Yeah, it's a practice where you use strategy in order to achieve goals. The difference, of course, is that theory is talking about strategy in general, in a general sense, while strategy as an art is in a particular sense. We talk about strategy of the United States or other actors. Perhaps a better comparison between strategy as a science than political science is strategy is musical science or art science, because that's a science about something which is done, which is created, and it's exactly what this kind of strategy I'm talking about is. And it has also been used the word praxeology, so a science about practice. And then there are lots of definitions one can use here. That is one of the confusing things. So strategy also is politics in action. So you say we have a political goal, and in order to achieve that, to come to that goal, you need strategy. So strategy puts in action in politics, and its basic goal for strategy is then to accomplish political objectives. And when you look at a state, it has normally not just one political goal, it has a lot. We can talk about a political project, which in itself encompasses a number of different political objectives, hopefully, but in the real world not always, coherent with each other. I used to use a US strategy in 2003, if you excuse me, so, as an example. So there they had the overall goal, stated goal, was to create a peaceful, democratic Middle East. Okay, that's a political project, and it's obvious that to accomplish this project, you would need to fulfill a number of, so to say, more discrete political objectives. And as you know, the Bush administration had chosen one of these objects was to topple Saddam Hussein in order to install a democratic government in Iraq. So that was that political objective. Now there are two different kinds, you could say, of political objectives. Either you want to keep status quo. As I'm in Sweden, you can say we small countries normally strive for keeping status quo. And then the other one is, of course, to change status quo into one's own favor. And the first one is defensive one. We want to keep status quo. And the other one is an offensive one. There's also difference in purpose, because if you have this defensive objective, normally you don't want to lose, while the one who follows an offensive political objective, he wants to win. There's a clear difference here. You could take Finland and Soviet Union in 1939-1940. Soviet Union invaded Finland in order to win, to occupy the country, to put it in as a part of Soviet Union. And the most important, Finns obviously could not win against Soviet Union, but they succeeded in avoiding to lose their freedom. So this is a difference in purpose between these two objectives. The next thing is that when you have this political project, it's a state, an actor, there is always the other. And the other has then also a political project with political objectives. And maybe these two are not at all corresponding, has anything to do, and then we don't need to talk about it. But when we talk about it in strategy, the other has a political objective which is against your own objective. And that means that when you pursue your strategy towards your objective, the other, will pursue a strategy against your objective. And that means that there will be a dialectic situation between these two political goals, and that in turn is one of the bases for the definitions of strategy. When we talk about the strategy, we talk about in conflict situation or potential conflict situation where there are at least two actors who have opposite goals, and that these two goals, so to say, are in conflict with each other. Of course, sometimes both have defensive objectives, and of course then there should be no conflict. But then we have this little difficult word, perceptions. But even if you both sides have pursue defensive objectives, the one and the other, because suspicion that the other one, he has now, I think he really has an offensive project. Many say that this was a situation during the Cold War, that both Soviet Union and NATO suspected that the other had an offensive objective goal, offensive political goal. While now, when we are looking back at the situation, it was probably not that. It was probably so that both NATO and Soviet Union pursued goals to keep the status quo, at least for the time being. You know, the United States containment strategy was a very, very long time goal. Now we talk about state actors, but of course, we talk about, as I did just, Soviet Union strategy and United States strategy and Swedish strategy and whatever. And of course, when we do that, we know that states do not act just by themselves. Behind the states there are statesmen, there are governments. And if you want to go even further, governments are supported more or less by people, and you have different groups and so on, which will influence its policy, more or less depending on the country. And this is a field of interesting analysis. But if you just states that we talk about state actors and the governments, and the governments, they consist of people, and that means that the whole thing of the conflict in the strategical sense is a human endeavor. It's human beings, and that means that the outcome of these conflicts will be heavily influenced by perceptions, mistakes. I have spent a number of years at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and I know from my own experience that sometimes the action you follow, the policy you follow, at least in the short term, was not really well thought of. But you just hadn't time because, as you know, diplomacy, one bad thing comes after another, and you haven't always the leisure of making big studies and taking in really conscious decisions. And this fact that strategy is a human endeavor in its turn means then that strategy and conflicts are marked by hazard, chance, and friction. Friction is one of the most important ideas of Clausewitz, and I'm a convinced Clausewitzian. And basically, friction is defined as the difference between what really happened and what you planned to happen. And the great German Field Marshal von Moltke during the 19th century, he said, and he knew because he had long experience, that there's no plan that survives the first meeting with the enemy. And it's something you must adapt to when making strategy, is that when the strategy is set in motion, there will be a situation, there will be first confrontation, and then from that first confrontation, there will be a new situation, and you will have to adapt to that new situation, and so on and so forth. And you cannot foresee what will happen. Now, there are people in and out uniform who pursue an idea called transformation or revolution in military affairs, even if that term starts to get a bit antiquated now. But anyway, the ones who really pursue this thinking, they promised a lot of funny words like dominant battle space awareness and so on. Basically, technology would make it possible to see and understand everything, know everything. And of course, as reality shown, that is not the fact. Now, everybody who has worked with a computer knows that things are not that easy, and even if you can see everything on a screen, you can't read humans' minds on a screen. So there will be mistakes, and the recent history of the last 10 years of military history shown an ample amount of example on this. So we know more, but we'll never ever know everything, and the one who waits until the situation is clear and he really understands, he will, if he meets a clever general on the other side, he will be outmaneuvered because he waits too long. You must have luck. All big generals have had luck, and then you can define what luck is. I can't do that. So that is some basic considerations on what I call politics in action. Now, so we have said we'll have a political goal, and this is a political goal, And to achieve that goal, we put ourselves, to keep the military side, to make it more easy, we will put ourselves an objective, a military objective. Let's say, let's take June 1944. The political goal was absolutely clear: defeat Germany. It's an excellent, from a strategic point of view, it's an excellent political goal. It's clear and so on. And at this time, one of the objectives, military objectives, was to invade France. So that was decided. We will invade France. We would also, of course, have other objectives like bombing and destroying German infrastructure in order to support this goal. And these objectives were more or less supporting. I'll come back to that. And then, so this is our military objective now, which General Eisenhower had. We want to invade France. How do we invade France? Okay. And then there might be several possibilities to invade France. 1944 again, where we talk about ways of actions. Basically, what was, it was decided that the most natural link between England and France was not the one used, the one which is where the German expected everyone. So they chose another way. So that was one way of looking at it. And it was also a combination of different means, because you must also have means to do something. You needed an invasion fleet. To invade in France, you need an invasion fleet. You need bombings. You need to bomb the German defense, which means that you need to have bombers, you need paratroopers. So you have a panoply of means which are necessary if you want to do this invasion of France in the way that they did it. So there's the point here is that there's a very, very close relationship between objective means and ways. You can have the idea of a three-legged stool, where one of the legs is objectives, one of the main ways, and then a third is means. So meaning that if these three things are not in balance, the stool will fall apart. So in any time you want to do something, you want to achieve an objective, you have to find out a way to achieve that objective, and that way will depend on a certain number of means. Obviously, if you have a lot of means that you have several ways of choosing between, and if you have many ways and means, you might also be able to pursue a number of different objectives. But if you don't have the means, and you cannot find the means needed in time, then that way will not be possible. And if you can't find another way with the means at hand, then you can't pursue the objective. To go back to Operation Overlord in 1944, Stalin wanted the Allies, the Western Allies, to invade France much earlier in order that an invasion would draw away German troops from Soviet Union. So, but at that time, the Allies decided that this was not possible because they didn't have the means, the landing craft and so on until 1944. That means that they couldn't make this invasion of France, and they couldn't achieve that objective at that time. It had to wait for some time. And this is a very, very, very important, the most important thing in strategy. This is the relation between objectives, ways, and means. And then this seems reasonable enough, I hope at least. And then this seems reasonable enough. What we have to do is to have a But then we should look at this here. At that time in the Second World War, the objective of invading France, and that was supporting of the overall political goal to defeat Germany, was a rather simple one. When we go to conflicts today, we find out that it is not that simple. Go back to the idea of Iraq 2003. So again, the political goal was to have a democratic, peaceful regime in Baghdad. The military objective chosen was to invade the country and topple Saddam Hussein, which was achieved. They did that, huh? But that objective did not, at least not so far, lead to the political goal. And this is one of the most important problems also in strategy, and particularly when we talk about military strategy, which Klaus is also underlined. There's a difference between success in war and success with war. I would say, on a general sense, that Western countries, Western power, are very, very clever when it goes to military operations. If you give a military objective, Western forces so far basically will be able to achieve it. But to find the military achievable objective that really leads to the political goal, that is increasingly difficult. And I will come back to why, one of the reasons, why a couple of reasons why that is so difficult. Then, next issue, when we have the one here, and when we have the other, and they have their conflict. Of course, they are not alone in this world. They will not. Their conflict is not in a vacuum, because they have to act in the real world where there are a lot of actors, and these other actors here are probably most of the time interested in one way or another in this conflict. So if this is real, when in our conflict with the other here, we want to, in one way or another, to take care of these other actors so that we can have liberty of maneuver, freedom of maneuver without the main enemy. And that is called the outer maneuver, the external maneuver. A typical example of this, we're going to go again back to 2003. There was the US had these two maneuvers, the external and the internal. The internal was between the coalition and Iraq, and then they had the external, which was particularly in United Nations. You know, the United States wanted to have the blessing of the UN Security Council, because that would give them much more liberty of action. It would give the legitimation would legitimate the military action. But as you know, that failed, and instead we have this quarrel about old and new Europe and so on. That's history now. But it's a good example. So you can when you do make a strategy towards the other, the important point is that you must also cater for the other possible actors in the geopolitical area, and see to that they are supportive, or at least cannot make big problems for you. Otherwise, you will not be able to concentrate on your main objective. And the next issue here is that there are two modes of strategy. There's a virtual and real. So in the real mode, we use forces, particularly military forces, for real, meaning we deploy military forces and to use them in combat. That is a real mode. But you also have the virtual mode. There are a number of names. Coercion, for instance, when you use military forces without really using them for combat, you just threaten with them. So, and today, in today's strategies, the virtual mode is much more common than the real mode. We have diplomacy, for instance, a typical virtual mode, where you play on the perceptions of the other. And the big difference here between these two modes is that in the real mode, you strive for victory. But in the virtual mode, you strive to convince. That's a very big difference between these two. Of course, particularly in a real conflict, you will need perhaps both of them. And of course also a military action is not just a physical thing, it is also a psychological thing. A military victory gives not only a number of enemies dead and so forth and so on, tangible things, it also gives a psychological impact. But in the virtual mode, you concentrate on not the actual use of your forces. And then the next of all these things I talk about is maneuver. And so you have to act. And a strategy is nothing will happen if you don't act. You will need maneuver. And the maneuver in this language is not just military maneuvers, running around with rifles on the ground or things like that. It's also diplomatic action in the way you do your diplomatic action, but it's also maneuver. One strategy, common strategy during the Cold War was deterrence. And the country where I happen to live in, France, now still continues with its nuclear deterrence. And deterrence, that is deter, you make others, potential enemies, afraid of hitting you. But that's not, to do that, you cannot just have a static. You cannot, it doesn't enough that you have this number of dangerous weapons and so on. You must also make it credible that you can use, that you will use them, that you can use them, and in order to do that, you need to have exercises and other things to show that we can and we will use our weapons to punish if you attack us. So the important is here. So there must always be maneuver, even if that maneuver in itself is not as tangible as deployed naval battle groups or things. Say 10 years ago, it was a lot of talking about defensive defense. And there was the idea that there were defensive weapons and inherently offensive weapons, and everybody should strive for, defenses, and then there would be no wars, basically. Yeah, but this is a mix-up, because when you go through the chain of political goals, military objectives, and then you have operational objectives which support them, and you have tactical objectives and so on. You must have both defensive and offensive. Even if you have a defensive political goal and you have your military objective is defensive, you cannot just sit down waiting for the enemy attack, as the French did in the Maginot Line in 1940. Because then you are slated to lose when something happens. You will always need to do something yourself in an offensive mode. Otherwise, it will not work. So defense and offensive are not, so to say, value-oriented. That the value will depend on where, on the structure you are. An offensive political goal is more or less illegitimate according to international law, but at least if it's a military goal. But an offensive goal, a defensive goal could also need offensive taxes. And so this is, you can look at, again, you go back to 1939 and 1940. The Germans had the Siegfried line between Germany and France. And of course that line was a defensive line vis-à-vis the Allies. So they could not attack Germany. And then, of course, after May 1940, that was not that interesting. But it had also an offensive purpose, because thanks to the Siegfried line in the west, the Germans had liberty of action in the east against Poland. So in that sense, depending on what you looked at it, from what side you looked at it, the Siegfried line was both offensive and defensive. The lesson, in my view, is you must be very careful when you use these words, because offensive for many has some, not, depending on where you stand politically and so on, this is maybe have not so good connotations as defensive. But in the real world, this is not so easy to say, and you will always need a mix. Even if you are an inherently offensive goal, you need some kind of defensive, because you must avoid being killed before you can start killing the other, to put it bluntly. So there must always be some kind of defense. We talked about this problem with the political goals, and I talked. Sorry, excuse me. Pause. So, why is it so difficult to formulate achievable military objectives that support political goals? So one reason, again, if we go back to and look at World War II, when I said it was rather easy, so we cannot today, at least not we in the West, and hopefully no otherwise, even if I would say parenthesis for Iran maybe. So the idea of having a bombing campaign as was pursued during World War II today is not possible. It is not economically possible, and it would not be legitimate. And there are a number of other things you are not able, or you cannot do, or both today. And that means that again, that the link between military success and political success is much more difficult today than it was in the old times, when military victory normally was equal to political victory. Another, and perhaps more important issue here is the what we talk about comprehensive security. We always say security today is not just military, even if some people tend to forget the word just. So they say security today is not military, but I would now keep the word just there between security and military, because we know that what are Europeans afraid of? They are not afraid, very few of them at least. There are some ones living in my country and my neighbors, but most of them are not at all afraid of Russian invasion today. They are afraid of terrorism, they are afraid of organized crime, they are afraid of climate change and everything that will follow for that. They are afraid of lack of energy, and so on and so forth. Huh? Water, very important. So as we talked about yesterday evening, I was there today, my young Christian. The Swiss have just made themselves a new tunnel after 15 years. They have broken through tunnel under St. Gotthard. And if you look at the map and all these tunnels, you can see how much of European transport system that is depending on a very finite number of tunnels. You can imagine what happens if someone blow them up. So we have then we have the security threats, the threats against security is much broader, much larger than nowadays, and than it was perceived as before. Maybe it was as broad before, but war was so more natural, more overwhelming in ancient times than it is today. And that means that we must have comprehensive strategies, meaning we must try to put together strategies that are put together different forces, diplomatic forces, economic forces, and so on and so forth, and make them go together towards the common political goal. And that is difficult. It's very easy to say comprehensive security, and that is extremely difficult to do for a number of reasons. One reason is very few persons have the experience, the overview that they really could do this. And then there are cultural differences between people in humanitarian aid and the military and diplomats and so on and so forth. So maybe this comprehensive, I tend to believe that this comprehensive security, comprehensive strategies are something to strive for, but probably we should strive for something somewhat less complicated, to talk about coordination and cooperation thing. At least try to that not different forces goes in completely different ways. One of the areas where comprehensive security and hence comprehensive strategy is very relevant is in the maritime field, and of course, as you know, well, we are on an island, so obviously the maritime field must be very much at heart for people living here in this. And because the maritime field is so typical in this way, because what you have, from a geographical point of view, you have security issues from the port, or even before the port, out to the coast, to the coastal waters, and to the high sea. And as the high seas are global, the security issue goes from the port of Nicosia all the way out in the world. That's from a geographical point of view. A blockade of the Hormuz Strait is very far away from both Sweden and Cyprus, but will, of course, affect us immensely. And then, on the other hand, in this maritime security field, you have environmental issues, you have illegal fishing, you have trafficking of drugs, which is one of the main problems now in Europe, of people, of arms. You have risk of terrorists, you have pirates, and of course you still have, even if they're not that tangible now, the old-fashioned naval threats. So that means that there is an important field, perhaps more important than in any other strategic field, to create maritime comprehensive strategies. And I will finish by talking about something which I call strategic functions. Also, when we look at all this, this is getting very complicated. And to be honest, and I have participating in doing this, well, when states do strategy, they tend not to follow the book. Strategy is not always done in that way. But you can analyze it. So theory may perhaps make it better. You can discuss it. But states, what I say, will always need a certain number of strategic functions. There will be different mixes of them, but they will all be needed. And the first and the foremost strategic function, I would say, is understand and anticipate. If you don't understand the geopolitical area and its problems and its possibilities, one always talks too much of problems and not enough of possibilities, so then you will not be able to cope with a strategic surprises, and you will always be surprised. Even how much technical gadgets you have, you will be surprised, because surprise is something which is in the mind of people. And then the governments will say, I don't want a big study on 150 pages about this problem. I want a one-pager which clearly sets the problem and tells us what to do. And I want it now, only this afternoon. Well, you may be able to do that if you have looked into this issue for a long time. You have people who are qualified in this area. I understand that you are working with water. Perhaps you will probably, if you have worked with water problem for many years, you will be able to put together perhaps a short, crisp paper saying what is the problem. But if you have no one who has studied this problem, that will not be possible. The next thing is what we call protection. And so citizens expect their governments to protect them, both at home and increasingly away abroad. The tsunami was for Sweden, as you know, a very traumatic experience when 3,000 people died. And that was the first time the Swedish government really was confronted with people saying, hey, we are taxpayers, okay, even if we are in Thailand, so why don't you help us? And the protection is, of course, a lot of things. It's a military issue, but this is foremost an internal security issue, and it is also a civil defense issue. It's about robust communications and so on and so forth. So it's a big issue. Deterrence. When you talk about deterrence, you always think about nuclear weapons and so on, and most of us do not have them. We'll never ever have them, hopefully. But deterrence is not just nuclear. That's not nuclear. Deterrence is, again, the possibility to punish the one and to make life difficult for the other one who attacks you. And that, again, it must be credible. Sweden had, during the Cold War, more or less credible conventional deterrence, meaning it would cost too much to take us for the Soviet Union. These two, protection and deterrence, are defensive. And then we have one which is a bit ambiguous, and it is prevention. So prevention, you try to create a situation, geopolitical situation, which is benign. And there are a lot of ways to do that. One of them is, like Sweden is in Afghanistan, for instance, with the hope of that will help to bring up a peaceful situation in Afghanistan. So prevention is peace building. Prevention could also be presence in maritime economical zone, and so on and so forth. So prevention is a very big issue, but it's also very important. And then you have the interventions to shape them, the real, more offensive actions where you want to shape the political environment to use. And that is a strategy which small states like Sweden and Cyprus normally are not able to pursue. So this goes toward the end. So why then? I haven't said that, but maybe you have guessed why strategy is important. So I said, so without strategy, you cannot. The chance that you will achieve your political goals is much reduced, and it will depend on pure luck. So a good strategy is necessary in order to pursue political goals in situations of conflict or potential conflict. You have to know what you want and try to find out ways and to achieve them, the means you need. So, and that's the next issue, that means that as a strategic theory is in itself important, I would say, because it gives the possibility to have structural discussions on this issue. Because it's very difficult otherwise if you just put a bunch of people together and say, hey, what are we going to do? Because everybody will have different views on the goals and different ways on how to achieve them, and probably that the whole thing will be a mess. So it offers a structured way of thinking on this kind of problem. But strategic theory, of course, does not in itself give solutions. This is very important. I haven't given one solution to anyone's problem during this half hour, but it helps finding the solutions, and it also immensely helps understand why things happen like they happen if you analyze operations and situations in the past, recent past, as in Iraq, or distant past. So that ends my intervention. I am happy if there is anyone who wants to ask me a question which I can answer, and challenge me in one way or another.